After finishing The Dead Zone and then Firestarter almost in tandem, Stephen King turned to writing one of his darkest books, and certainly one of his most claustrophobic and intimate books to date, and that was Cujo. It was in 1977 in the spring. He was then living in Bridgeton, Maine, and he was having problems with his motorcycle, and a friend told him about someone who could handle the repairs out in the country. He drove out and experienced something very much like the Trentons' experience in the film. A fellow out in kind of the backwoods who was a mechanic who could fix things, but he also had a dog that was a little mean. And when he experienced that dog, that set a train of thought in motion of what would happen if, someone were put in this situation, and what would happen if it became essentially a siege set in this one location. And that became Cujo. People always wonder where the name Cujo came from, because it's not to be found in a Spanish language dictionary, for example.
His name's Cujo. Cujo?
It appears to be an invented name that Stephen King adapted to the dog. It's now obviously connected with Stephen King and with evil dogs, although I know some people who've named their very nice dogs Cujo.
He's a great dog.
The book begins in a very interesting way, because its opening sentence is "once upon a time," as if this were a fairy tale, and sort of leads the reader, who by now had been accustomed to Stephen King as being a writer of supernatural horror, into this landscape that's very much filled with realistic pain, anguish, and horror, and that's not going to end in a good way. It begins once upon a time like a fairy tale, but it ends in a very, very bad way. In the final pages of the book, Tad Trenton, the boy, dies. And Cujo was a very successful book, but there were people who had some problems with it because of that downbeat nature of it. Did it do as well, and has it continued to do as well as a seller as some of his other books? I don't think so, and I think in large part it's because of the darkness of the book.
The second film that I ever directed was a film called Alligator, which was a horror film spoof. And Stephen King saw Alligator and called Dan Blatt, the producer of Cujo, and told him that he should meet with me about possibly directing this film. I'd read the book. I was excited about the possibility of doing this film because it had all the ingredients of what I consider a good horror film. It was about two kinds of fear. It was about real fear and imaginary fear. Dee Wallace's imaginary fear is that she's going to grow old and useless and bored in this little town in Maine. The husband's fear of financial insecurity, the little boy sensing all this fear and tension and stress in the household, begins to imagine monsters in the closet. And ultimately, in this particular story, when a real fear, the rabbit St. Bernard, entraps her, it puts everything into perspective and the family's able to unite. So I thought it was a very worthwhile idea. Dan Blatt and I got along, and I think as far as Dan was concerned, I was the guy for the job. However, at that point, the film was set up at a studio, and the person in acquisitions at that studio had different ideas about who should direct it, and he was unmovable. So they wound up hiring another director to direct the film. Then the original studio backed out of the deal, and it was on the market. So I called Dan, and Dan said, well, yesterday we just made a deal with Warner Brothers, and so we're proceeding with the same director at Warner Brothers. A week later, I got a call from Dan Blatt saying, we're thinking of making a change. If we do, would you be interested? Yeah, I said.
I told Lewis when I called him on the phone, I said, listen, if I hire you, you're going to have to come up here, you're going to have one day, and then we're going to start shooting again. And there was a long pause, and he said 2 days. And I said, fine, we'll shut down for 2 days.
The big thing that Lewis brought, especially at the time he came on the movie, was an incredible professionalism, a calmness. This is the way we're going to do it. And any hysteria that had been previous to his showing up just went away. And we felt we were really in good hands, and then it became a real team effort and everybody pulling on the same end of the rope.
Stephen King had written the original draft that I'd read, and I felt that he had strayed too far from the book. And so Dan and I talked about bringing in another writer, and while I was away from the project, that writer came in, and what this writer did, which I thought was brilliant, was go back to the book and edit it down. In every respect, it was a terrific script except for one. It was way too long. So we brought in another writer who made changes where necessary to streamline and reconnect the story after we'd eliminated subplots. In the book, the dog was a reincarnation of a bad guy from a previous book. And I toyed around with various ways of showing or suggesting that there was some real supernatural element in the closet. And I couldn't come up with any solution to that with our means at the time that wouldn't seem hokey to me. And I decided to eliminate any suggestion that there was really some kind of supernatural monster in the story. When I replaced the original director, certain elements were already in place. I changed some of them, but I also kept some of them. The cast was originally selected by Dan Blatt, the producer, and the original director. And the cast was fantastic.
Dee, she's from Kansas. She's a middle American girl. And I think that's why Steven Spielberg chose her to do E.T. And that's why I had chosen her before E.T. on The Howling.
Getting Dee was quite a coup, and that was really Dan Blatt kind of calling in a bit of a favor, although I think Dee really sunk her teeth into the part. So starting there, we felt in really good, good hands.
It's a tour de force role for a woman. And I'm always looking at the different layers in a movie, But for me, you go, wow, this could happen. It's easy for you to put yourself in the character's positions.
And I think that there's something very relatable about her that's real. So that when the audience sees her, she's a woman who's involved in a marriage that's not working.
You had to care, and you had to care from everybody's perspective. But most of all, the relationships with the two men were important to sort of set up the sadness of Donna's life and the need in her life. But ultimately, it was all about the connection between this kid and this mother. And any mother can tell you what that connection is. I mean, I would die for my kid in an instant.
Hugh Kelly had never been in a movie before, and we read him in New York.
Dan was extremely nervous. This was a really big shot for him. And he had just come off of soap operas where they work entirely differently. Everybody in the show worked differently. Christopher and myself live together. We work absolutely from a different place. So here you have three people coming from entirely different points of view as far as how they prepare for their part. And somehow, you just come together and you honor each other. And for me, that's the high of acting.
But the movie was going to rise or fall if we could find the right kid. And we went all over the country looking for the boy. And Danny Pintauro was from New Jersey.
My mom was a hairdresser in New Jersey. She had a picture of me on her mirror, and every one of her clients would just say, he's so cute, you should send his pictures in and have him go to a modeling agency. And she took Polaroid pictures of me and sent them to this agency. And the next day they called with a job for me. And then it just never stopped.
What was also interesting that Danny Pintauro was 6 years old and couldn't read yet. So that he worked with his mother, who was there all the time and who was fantastic, and he memorized his lines, but not because he could read them.
Can my monster work that?
Looking at the movie now and reading the book now is how I gain perspective, because when I was 6, I had no idea. I was just so excited to be amongst all these people and in this car that didn't have all the pieces.
In a strange kind of way, he and Dee were the same kind of actors. They really operated from the inside. And I think whatever strengths the picture has, those two together were pretty powerful.
Danny was the most incredible child actor I think I've ever worked with. And they've all been great. But what we asked Danny to do and the places we asked him to reach for a 6-year-old, the fact that he even understood where those places were was amazing to me.
Stephen King lives in Maine, and most of his stories are set in Maine in the fictional town of Castle Rock, as was Cujo. But we wanted to shoot, because of budgetary restraints, in California. So We went up to Northern California and filmed most of the film in a town called Mendocino, which had a lot of Cape Cod type architecture, was on the coast, and we thought would be a pretty good double for Castle Rock for Maine. The exterior of Dee Wallace's house was a facade that was constructed on a hillside because it had a beautiful view of the ocean in the background. We wanted to take advantage of that. And then the interior was a completely different house.
And then, of course, she goes to a farm to get the car fixed. And we found the location in Petaluma.
Hello?
I hired a production designer by the name of Guy Comtois, and he had a lot to do with the look of the picture. He was from Montreal, and he also turned out to be an absolute fantastic, incredibly hardworking production designer.
In the beginning of this film, when Danny Pintauro, character Tad, has to turn out the light, I constructed that whole sequence based on a little game that I used to play when I was 5 or 6 years old. I used to enjoy imagining that there were monsters under my bed, a wolf under my bed. And the trick was to flick off the light switch and somehow get into bed before the wolf could come out from underneath, because the wolf could only come out in the dark. So I decided to toy with that idea and had a lot of fun with it, because the cinematographer, Jan de Bont, was a person who would accept any challenge. And when he does click the light off, I built 2 sets. There was a normal size set that we saw when the lights were on, and then there was an elongated set when the lights go off to increase the distance that he has to travel, which I amplified even more by shooting it in slow motion.
No tricks, no visual effect, and it worked so effectively. And I was like, I think that's exactly what a kid feels. That's what I felt.
That set was so incredibly cool. I loved that set. Because they had described it to me earlier as, oh, you're going to run through this room. I had no idea. And then I saw it, and I was really totally just amazed that they'd built this.
And then as he dives towards the bed, I told Jan de Bont what I'd like to do is have a shot of him running towards the camera in slow motion, and then go underneath the camera and have the camera tilt down until it's completely upside down, so that as he dives into the bed in slow motion, we get the feeling that he's falling into space. And I can't imagine any other cinematographer being able to do that. We were on a very tight schedule, but he constructed a little platform in the room. You could support him and the camera, so he could actually operate as the boy ran under the camera and turned the camera upside down.
It was just this kind of meld of talent that brought this thing up. We look at the dailies and you just sort of, oh my God, how are we doing that?
We shot this film in the middle of winter, and when we went to shoot the scenes in the barnyard with Dee Wallace trapped in the car, the point of the story is that it's very hot and she's dehydrating and her son almost dies, and it was raining most of the time. And it was cold. It was down in the 40s on a lot of the days when we were shooting. We were literally coming out and shooting between raindrops when there'd be a break in the rain. And Dee Wallace and Danny are virtually unclothed in those scenes. It was awful.
The working conditions were so hard and emotionally so difficult. And finally, I said, guys, you just have to put some heaters in the car, because Danny had no clothes on, So they did, which of course caused some sound problems. So we'd have to turn the heat off every time we rolled. And I had to look hot, so they wanted to use glycerin, but I hate the way it looks. And on top of which, rain or no, there are flies everywhere on a farm. And they love anything sticky. And I had Cairo syrup on me with the blood.
We were fighting it all the time in order to simulate the weather, and that's where Jan was one of the great contributions Jan made to that picture.
Yeah, it was difficult to create heat, so sometimes you had to put like flames in front of the lens to create a false sense of heat.
Every day of that shoot was taxing. Every day was. And the water that she pours on me is actually hot water, because it was that cold. It was freezing. And here we are, being spritzed with sweat to make us look like we're actually dehydrated. The movies, you'd never know.
It was not your typical Stephen King, and we thought this is such a cool way to do a horror movie that's that doesn't have a supernatural element to it. Although we thought it was daunting at the time of how we're going to get this dog to do all this stuff.
I'm one of the animal guys in town. I did the kangaroo in Matilda. I did the orangutan in Going Ape. I did bears and monkeys and gorillas and chimps. So I was one of the go-to suit guys, you know, in Hollywood. So I got called in. They were doing Cujo, and the producer brought me in because I've got that reputation. So the first meeting was with the producer, and we just talked and got along really well. I gave him some ideas on how we could do some stuff, and so I basically had the job, but I had to go meet with the trainer. So I had a day with the trainer and the producer, and the trainer was treating me like a dog, literally. He was giving me dog commands, like, here, you know what I mean? It told me what, I watched the dog, the real dog, do some stuff, and then, you know, sit, leap, attack, just different things that the trainer would do and the producers would watch. I had played dogs before in a couple other things, but to really do like the attack scenes and incorporating with back and forth, no, it was a challenge to pull it off, and it was it was fun. I liked it. Kangaroo was tough. You got to hop, and I was fighting in the ring, but this was a whole other number altogether. And the suit itself, you weren't sealed in it. You know what I mean? The head was like out here. So you were basically seeing and breathing through the dog's mouth. So at least you had some air exchange. I did all the attack scenes with the stars. If you saw the dog attacking somebody, it was attacking a stunt person or the trainer. When you saw any of the stars' face, any of the actors, it was me. And the guy that played the sheriff was a big guy. And he was standing up. Cujo attacks him, you know, on the neck. He was so big and so rough that I couldn't stay, you know, attached to him. So they literally wired the dog's head to his chest. You know what I mean? So he could, and he had me like by the head, and he was like lifting me off the ground, you know, by the head and neck as he, as he was doing it. I forgot his name now, but I'm, you know, going, dude, I gotta keep my feet on the ground, because he was just, you know, dog suit wasn't too bad. It had the paws, no back paws, because it was all like the front and stuff I was going to do. As we started getting deeper into the movie, when the dog was more rabid and covered with mud and covered with blood and covered with pus, you know what I mean? Other people's blood all over him and matted, and the dog was getting sicker, and, you know, it was getting, you know, the suit was becoming a wreck, you know, wet and muddy, and like I'd take it out of a garbage bag, it was like mildewy, and the stunt coordinator said, my guy's not putting that suit on. You know, get it. He said, Peter, I'm not going to put it in my room. And the coordinator, well, then get the suit its own room, you know, but you can't leave. And people always say to me, was the suit hot? They shot this thing in November, and it was supposed to be like hot out, so everybody was like in there, and it was freezing. It was damp and cold up in Petaluma, you know, where they shot it. So I was actually nice and, you know, comfortable in the suit. Dee Wallace at one point when I was attacking her said, would you growl and bark? It'll help me. You know, so I did. You know, of course, you're not going to use any of that, but this is just for the actors' you know, benefit. I did the things that the dog was too smart to do. You can't train a dog to hurt himself. So, like when Cujo smashes it to the car door, that was me smashing my head. At the end, he dives through a window. The dog wouldn't go through the window with the glass. So I went through the window, and they cutting to the dog, throwing the little glass, you know what I mean? It's cut really well. There was also a puppet head that they used occasionally. Cutting back and forth, the real dog, me, puppet head, it was seamless, you know. There was times when I knew it was me, and I really couldn't tell, you know, where the cuts were. I also did, you know, some of the diving out at the guys that take them down. Just, you know, numbers of like that. I mean, one time the stunt coordinator like literally helped me, grabbed me, like gave me a heave-ho off camera to throw me into, you know what I mean, with velocity to take these people down.
After looking at the first dailies that I was shooting, I was very happy, and I couldn't wait to see the scenes cut together. I started going into the editing room on weekends to look at scenes edited together, and was extremely disappointed. And so I decided to change editors, and I hired Neil Travis, and he started editing things from scratch, and suddenly scenes started to come to life.
Louis and Jan did a very good job as far as creating a mood and a tension. The only thing that I would say that I probably brought to it was a knowledge of the fact that you want to try to direct people's attention in the wrong direction in a thriller. You want to tell people to look over here, and then something jumps at them from where they're not looking.
God, you scared the shit out of me.
It's just mainly to create an atmosphere of the unexpected.
You think about all the great movies, you'll think about the music. So music is one of the 3 or 4 most important elements in the movie. And Charles came in, he's a real musician, and he has a tremendous heart.
The music in this film, I was particularly pleased with. Charles Bernstein wrote the score, and I met him after the film had been completed. And the music was all appropriate and effective. And with Charles, almost all of it worked from the get-go.
Cujo is a St. Bernard who is, as I like to say, done in by 2 bats. First by a flying bat and then by a baseball bat. Now, if you take the score to Cujo and you listen to it, 90% of it, 80% of it is very pleasant, family, emotionally warm music. And that's part of the mosaic in Cujo. The trick in Cujo, for me, was how to integrate these elements so that it doesn't sound like I've written 2 scores, one for the family and one for the evil spirit in the dog. Interestingly, if you recall the first scene, it's really very idyllic. When I scored that scene, I had not written a theme for Cujo yet. So I scored the little bunny running around and the dog chasing it and all of that. And then it wasn't until reel 3 that I started to get a feel for what the music for Cujo should sound like, what his personality was, what that element that is the dark element was going to be. I was thinking about my friend John Williams, who's the greatest composer that I can think of, what he did with Jaws. But when I wrote Cujo, I thought, low French horns for Cujo. That's what I'll do. As I said, it was reel 3 when the theme occurred to me. So I had to go back to the beginning of the movie and plant it on the shot when the dog first appears. I remember having a discussion with him about the music being so idyllic at the beginning that people might think they were going to watch a Disney-type movie. And so they came up with the idea of a title card, which was a swirling pool, and then the name Cujo came out. And I said, well, we could use the Cujo theme over the title and let everybody know they were going to see a scary movie, and then get light, having promised them that later something will happen, and we all resonated with that idea. I also believe that one of the musical tools of fear is relentlessness. And what you have there is a kind of relentless. The dog is relentless. It's not going to lose interest and go away. So it's that aspect of the dog that is absolutely primitively relentless on getting whatever it is the dog wants, which is flesh in this case. So the music basically evokes that.
I think the score was extremely contributory to the success of the movie. And sound design also.
Most of the growls in the movie are actual dog growls, a lot of which we recorded in sync when we were shooting the picture, when the dog's actually growling. Some were done in post-production and added to sweeten the soundtracks. We actually brought in a man who was very good at creating dog sounds, growls and whines, and we just went through the whole picture, and every scene with the dog, he would put in some sound effect and try to give that dog just a little bit more emotion.
What are you growling at?
And then you treat it and you slow it down or you twist it somehow in the sound work, and it comes out sounding great.
And so the sound effects of the dog and the music all would work in concert with each other.
I knew we had done some terrific things. There was no question about that. I knew that when we were shooting it. Whether the entire picture as a whole would have the emotional impact that an audience could grab onto, I wasn't really sure till I saw it with an audience.
The first time we previewed it, during the first half of the movie, they were sort of moderately interested, but in the second half of the movie, they cranked all the way up to extreme interest. And so the studio, in their infinite wisdom, said, well, why don't we cut as much footage out of the beginning as we can to get to the most exciting part quicker? And then we previewed it again, and it was real interesting because the interest level at the beginning of the film was about the same. And in the second part of the film, they didn't care as much about whether Dee survived or not. And the interest level in the second half of the movie peaked out once we put the character footage back. So that proved to me, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that developing characters that the audience can understand and care about is critical.
Every single person that worked on this picture, every single person in every category poured their soul into this thing. It was quite something to see. And each one of these people was a very different person. And everybody had a point of view.
Any movie that I do, it takes me about 3 times. The first time, I think my career's over. The second time, I remember all the stuff that was going on the set, you know, and all the challenges and everything. And the third time, I can sit back and go, wow, that's a pretty good ride. You know, I can look at Cujo now and go, there's not much I would do differently.
I was not traumatized at all. I was, if anything, I was extremely fascinated by the equipment, by the blood on the dogs, by the way that there was actually someone on staff whose job it was to do the paw prints on the glass and make them look like they had looked the day before. That stuff fascinates me. I've had dogs my whole life. Never terrorized by the animals. If anything, I love them more. There was nothing scary about being on that set. We're just good actors. We just make you think we're freaked out.
On a sad note, Christopher Stone, who played Dee Wallace's lover, did a terrific job, and he is Dee Wallace's late husband, and he's no longer with us, and his contributions were enormous and well appreciated. I love this film. I think it's my best work. It's the most accomplished film that I've ever made. Of course, I can't take sole credit for that. Thank you, Dan Black. Thank you, Guy Comtois, the production designer. Thank you, Jan de Bont. Thank you, Dee, Daniel, Hugh Kelly, Danny Pintauro, and all the other people involved with the film, because they all contributed to making this a great film.